Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to Tekpon. Today our guest is Eric, the partner at FLG Partners. Hello.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
Fantastic. Very nice to meet you and excited for
Likewise,
the
and
for the
thank me,
podcast.
thank you for having me on your podcast.
Great to have you. Please tell us what your company does. What is FLG Partners?
So FLG Partners is a 30-person consulting firm. All 30 of us we're all senior CFOs, and we all have public and public company CFO experience. We work with venture-backed and private equity-backed companies on the private side and a whole range of public companies. We work as interim CFOs, so we don't go in as consultants. We actually sit in the seat, and we are the CFO for all intents and purposes. And it's a really great platform for me, and it's allowed me to work with over 40 SaaS companies in the last, say, 15 years.
Amazing. And you said you only work with public companies?
Yes.
Okay,
I
so
work
public
with,
SaaS companies.
yeah, public SaaS companies and private equity-backed SaaS companies. I run the SaaS franchise for my firm. So the firm does SaaS, technology, appliance, hardware, and then life sciences, biotech, med tech, and but I run the SaaS practice.
Amazing. So you're the perfect guest for our podcast regarding
Thank you.
SaaS. What did you say is the biggest mistake that SaaS companies make regarding their finances?
This is I think the biggest problem is that there's no common language in the business. And I'll give you some stories. I've witnessed this firsthand through, for example, sitting in a board meeting where an argument breaks out over how to calculate LTV to CAC. And that really happened. And so obviously it's not a good use of time for a board meeting if the investors and the management team are arguing, or I saw where two investors were arguing about it. That's not good board governance. But also, another example, there was an argument over what should gross margin be for a SaaS company. And this
Hmm.
really happened. And then the CFO ultimately got fired, and I stepped in. And took care of that. But I'll give you another example from an internal point of view. I observed a board meeting where the CFO and the chief revenue officer both came in and they had different numbers for LTV to CAC. Well,
Okay.
CFO later gets fired, but you can't have there's the lack of a common language and having each individual determine what their view of SaaS is. That's the biggest challenge.
Thank you for sharing. And usually, how many employees are at companies that you help on average, let's say?
It's
At least
so
500?
it'll be about yeah, 500 was probably the median number.
I understand. I understand. That's
Yeah.
that's awesome. And how many companies do you help at a time?
I try to work with one or two clients at a time. And so that's one or two clients where I am the CFO. I'm sitting in the seat. I report, I do all of the functions of the CFO. I have all the direct reports, and I'm responsible to the management team and the board. And then I also do board advisory or CFO advisory, typically on matters of SaaS or public company reporting.
That's great. And what do you actually do as the interim CFO? Do you also prepare the next CFO for the company, and you just step in like a couple of months, or how does it work?
Well, that's such a great question because my job or our job at FLG is to make the position very attractive so we can get the best possible CFO there. And there are a lot of companies where the CFO culture it's not expected for a variety of reasons, right?
Yes.
And it's a good CFO will look at that and not want to be involved in it. And so if I come in and I can stabilize the situation, make progress, and set the next person up for success, then we can get a great CFO.
That's great. That's a great mindset. I love it. And how many partners are there at PLG Partners, or how many CFOs?
We have we have about 30 right now, 30 active partners doing work, and we are only CFOs. We don't have
Wow.
anybody. We don't have an accounting team or an FP&A team or tax team. It's focused just on chief financial officers.
Okay, and who founded the company?
Oh, it's this is a great story. It's founded almost 20 years ago
Okay,
in 2004, where a couple CFOs had been moving through companies that were troubled, and then they said, "Well, let's stop betting our careers on this. Let's just start a firm." And then it's grown from there. From those four people, it's grown from there.
wow, great story. And when did you join exactly?
I joined about 5 years ago.
Okay, and I love to hear the background of your career and how you started it, if you can share with us.
Absolutely, and I won't go too far back, but I went to the Naval Academy, United States Naval Academy, and I served in submarines for 7 years after I graduated, and then I wanted to leave. I wanted to get into business, and so I went in. So I went to business school,
Okay,
and graduated, and I wanted to do something with finance, and I did investment banking. My bank went bankrupt during the com days, so I was like, oh, I didn't realize civilians could be unemployed. That was my, I didn't understand that. And so I got a CFO job, then I ran FP&A for a Fortune 500 company, and then I started into SaaS businesses.
when exactly did you get into SaaS?
Yeah, so I left the Fortune 500 company and I went to in 2007, and I went to a streaming company, and this was it wasn't a pure SaaS, but we hosted and streamed video. So it was we were the backbone for some early emerging social media networks at the time. Unfortunately, not Meta, but we were doing
Yeah.
that, and then I got into it was a tech-enabled services. It was a public company called Ziprility, tech-enabled services company. We were pivoting to SaaS, and we didn't get all the way there. And this was in 2014, so SaaS was known, right? It was becoming known. And when I left that company, I was going through Silicon Valley, pitching myself as a SaaS CFO in 2014, and I didn't know the basics, right? And people would say, "Well, what's the magic number?" I don't know.
Yeah.
What's LTV to CAC? What's a
Yes.
cohort? I just didn't know these things, and so told myself that I had to get into a company and just start, get my hands on the data, start working with it, start building cohorts, and start looking at retention rate, gross and net, like just working with the data. So
Yes.
I did that. I went to a firm and we started doing consulting, or that did this type of consulting, and I just took any SaaS company that came through the pipeline, and then fast forward 8 years, 9 years, I've worked with about 40 SaaS companies. But it was, and not to extend it too long, but it was this experience that led to my book, because I would go in and I would come across some issue, right? And like the issues I mentioned, and then I would study it, and then I would write a blog post about it. How to calculate gross margin, how to calculate LTV to CAC, and all of its perturbations, right? How to present annual recurring revenue, how to present contract annual recurring revenue. And so I kept writing these blog posts,
Okay.
and the blog posts ultimately led to the book.
Amazing, amazing. And for anybody that doesn't know, what is the name of the book and
Yeah.
why should people read it?
Well, thank you. It's called Hacking SaaS, and it's a nod to growth hacking, right? Growth hacking SaaS, insider's guide to managing software business success. And it's the sum of all of my, well, finance career, certainly, but it's the sum of my experience working with SaaS companies. It provides a common language, right? As I've heard it throughout my career, and a reference and resource for a wide range of readers, right? So it's seasoned SaaS professionals can read it and calibrate their knowledge. Junior people, right, can read it and advance 3 years of knowledge in their SaaS career. So the SaaS knowledge used to be something that had to be learned on the job, like an apprenticeship, right? And instead, like my book, someone can sit down, study it, walk in every day, and apply the learnings, and really next step up. It's I there's there Until my book come out, there's not been an academic resource that people can use to save time working as an apprentice.
What did you say is the biggest learning that people can get from the book?
Yes, this is it's the common, like to refer to as the common language, right? And this is, my book described how SaaS is discussed, how it's managed, right? And so I really want, people to be able to read the book, read the section, and go into work the next day and say, okay, I learned about this. I learned about, what the financial profile should be for my business. And I'm going to go in, I'm going to check what's mine and how do I benchmark it? And so and when I say read, I really mean study, right? This isn't it's not a book where you read at night to fall asleep, or maybe you would fall asleep, but it's the way you should work is like you sit down and you study it. And I introduced concepts. So I introduced the metrics, of course, and there are a lot of places to find metrics, blogs and webinars, but I introduced the metric and then I show the math behind it. Like, why do people say that LTV to CAC best class is 3, right?
Yes.
I mean, what does that mean, right? You can read it in a blog and you'll get it, but I provide the depth and I provide the really the understanding behind it. So it's a deep dive on SaaS metrics, right? And then I also provide a framework for how to think about this business models, because the business models, SaaS is a business model, and the business model varies depending upon the type of customer one serves or the type of industry one serves. And then the metrics vary by each of those categories as well.
Of course. We'll also link the book in the description, but curious to know,
thank you.
who do you think it's for? Who should read it? Mostly accountants or people looking to get into CFOs? Or
I'm so glad you mentioned that. A lot of SaaS is not based on accounting. Right? When we say annual recurring revenue, that's not defined by accounting thinking. Unit economics are not defined by, GAAP, which is the rules for accountants. The financial profile, they are finance concepts, but a lot of the book, so it is someone who's in finance in SaaS, or a SaaS CFO or finance person will be able to pick it up and go through the upfront finance section pretty quickly. Then they'll get into, the true meat of the book, which is, it's a framework for thinking about SaaS business models. So it is, finance people will probably most readily take to it, but it's for a wide range of people involved in SaaS. So sales, customer success, and less so product and technology. And I'll give you an example. I was in New York this past week. I live in San Francisco. I was in New York last week for a presentation and book signing for a former client. And during the book signing, most of the people that came up to me were in customer success. And, and their questions were, like, how do I become a customer success manager? Like, how do I do it? What metrics should I use? And I talk a lot about the go-to-market strategy in the book, and then I have an enterprise SaaS section. And so it really led to a lot of great, and it was interesting. The biggest interest in SaaS came from the CS team.
wow, really unexpected, but I'm sold.
Yeah.
So I'd like to.
Well,
read the book.
I guess my point, it's a wide range of readers, right? And I'll go back to, I'll give you a couple other examples, but investors who argue over a SaaS metric in a board meeting, they should read it, right? Because that's not a good use of time. A CFO who comes from outside the industry and doesn't understand gross margin, what the profile should look like, it's that person. It's the CRO who has numbers that don't match that of the CFOs, right? And they both need to read it and be in sync. And let me give you 2 real world examples, additional real world examples. But
Okay.
This past year, I advised a $30 million revenue enterprise SaaS business, right? And everything was on the up and up until this year. And like every other SaaS company out there saw a decline in revenue. Well, if you sell up front, then cash always, as you grow, cash increases. They never had to worry about that. They did not forecast cash. And so when cash went down, they were asked to forecast the cash. And the VP of FP&A, a very senior person, did not know how to forecast deferred revenue. Now, if this sounds really geeky and too depth, I get it, but that is a major hole, right? And when I heard it, when the CFO called me and I was advising that person, when she called me, she said, "Oh, do you know how to forecast deferred revenue?" My heart sank because I thought, well, if they don't know that, then they're not going to be able to get it. Yeah, and then so the VP of FBA left, the CFO left, so even senior people. And I'll give you one more example. I worked for a company that it was a transaction-based company, and the investor said, "You need to become SaaS at all costs." And when I met with them, they said, "Well, we're trying to become a SaaS business." And I said, "Well, what have you done?" They said, "Well, we don't really know what to do." So we started reading a bunch of blog posts and stuff, and then we've done as much as we can. And these are, I'm 56. These are people in their 40s, late 40s. They've founded multiple companies, and they didn't know what SaaS was. So just another example of that.
But for one mistake like that, like you mentioned in the second example, the CFO gets fired if he doesn't know how to calculate a specific metric, or I guess that's his responsibility.
It really is, and that's and I wrote it for people like that too. If your SaaS knowledge has to be 100% excellent, right? And because there is no common language in the business, when the CFO goes in, and I've had this, I've gone in and I said, okay, our LTV to CAC is this, our CAR is that. And board members, they don't understand the common language, and they'll push back and say, oh no, AR is just this. And I not only have to understand how to calculate, but I have to understand how to communicate it too. And so the book, I mean, working, building the book, right? I have the credibility where I can sit back and say, no, here that's respectfully incorrect, but here's why this way is correct. And then here's the background. And then here are the benchmarks. Here are what other companies are doing. Right. And so I can speak with authority, and the book gives people that, right? Gives them the authority to not only say, oh, this metric should be X, but here's why. Here are the 5 reasons why, and here are the 20 other companies that are doing it that way.
Yeah, I totally understand. What would be your best piece of advice for a 20-year-old, 30-year-old starting to get into finance or looking to become a CFO?
It's a great question, and let me answer maybe with a general statement. But a lot of people when they enter the workforce, and this really, I think, started with my generation, Generation X. There was a sense, especially when technology became such a large part of the economy, but there's always been this sort of expectation or thinking that by jumping around to different companies, I can get ahead. Right. I have, a year here, so I'm going to jump here. I'll be here. This company's on the rise. And so it's partly fear of missing out, which I understand because they're, in boom times, everyone's going public. Right. So I'm jumping to the hottest thing. And it's partly because, people think that that's how to get ahead. So like as your career grows, people think by jumping around, they can accelerate their career. And and I've done that. I've had periods of doing that too, right? Like jumping into other companies. It's a natural human response. But my advice is to, as soon as you find something you're passionate about, and whether it's SaaS or whatever it is, but just get into one company and just keep hammering at your craft day in and day out. Bunch of little things done good equals greatness, right? And just keep doing that and if you do that over a 20-year career, I can all but guarantee that you'll be happier, more passionate, more excited about your job than someone who took an alternative route.
Amazing. I really wanted to ask you about it, being, let's say, 3 months in a company, then switching, and so on and so forth. The same. I thought that you get more learning experience by doing that, but it's interesting to hear what you have to say. What would you say is the minimum months or years that somebody has to stay in a company to get their full learning experience?
Yeah, that is also a great question because a lot of it depends upon the environment, right? And if you go into it, a lot of times, employees, people will go into companies and it's not the right fit from the beginning. So the thumb rule is you should stay at least a year. If you do less than a year, then you don't have to put it on your resume. If you do more than a year, you do have to put it on your resume, right? And well, I guess that's how it used to be, but that was the thinking. But it's less about the year, but everyone should seek to find passion, good leadership, good mentorship, a good culture. And I know everyone says that, like find a good. It's really hard to find in tech because everyone's moving around, and when there's high attrition, and so I would say, seek out companies that have a good culture where you can grow your career. And then my adjacent point to that would be make sure you understand the business, right? The company, not, what it does, what product it sells, but, how's it doing? Has its stock price been dropping for 8 quarters? Have they lost money for 3 years and, their cash in the bank? And let me finish that thought with a story, but I had a client I was their first CFO, and it was really challenging. They'd raised all the money they could, and they were they'd sell these big contracts, and they'd live off that money. And I was there, and the CFO search took, I think it was 9 months. And other CFOs would come in, they'd ask questions, and they knew immediately to leave. And there was a CFO who is a good friend. He's a great operator, a great CFO, public and private company, person. He was in Seattle, wanted to move to the Bay Area. So he came in, he found this company. Everybody said great things about the company. And so he didn't spend a lot of time with me. He was so enthralled by the idea. He thought, wow, this is the greatest opportunity ever. And he asked me why I didn't take it. And the truth was, well, I'm interim CFO. That's my profession. And he didn't ask a single question about the financial state of the company, cash. And the day after he started, we met in a conference room down in Redwood City, and he sat down and he goes, "Okay, Eric, cash is king. How much cash is how much cash do we have?" I said, well, Krishna, I said, we don't have enough money to make payroll next week. But I said, we're working on this contract and he said, hang on, wait, there's no cash in the business? And I said, no, that's just how the company sort of operates this way. And he got really mad at me. And he said, well, how can that be? Why didn't you tell me there was no cash in the bank? And I said, well, Krishna, it's not my job to tell you not to come to this company. I'm the sitting CFO. If you had asked me, is there cash? I would have said, no, there's no cash right now. And it's a problem. But so it was fascinating. It's a phenomenal guy, phenomenal operator, comes into the business, becomes enthralled. So, and then finds himself in a really bad spot. And I think that this happens, and I've seen this happen maybe a dozen CFOs over the last just 5 years. So my other bit of advice for the young person is make sure you're getting into a company that's going to be there, right? And we could have a whole nother podcast about that, but that's my other piece of advice.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'd love to know what has been your biggest challenge throughout your career.
Again, I think the biggest challenge is, I think in general, it's finding companies with good leadership, right? And in my career, where finding a healthy environment where, and I've had a lot of great bosses, but finding in the Fortune 500 company, it's a different story. But once I entered the tech, it was finding like a really great business culture. And a lot of times I think my challenge was going into companies that weren't doing well, where I was enthralled, like, oh, I get to be a public company CFO. Like, I want it, and then I don't want it, right? And now that particular case turned out okay, but I think that's the challenge, right? And then moving around, like, to find the next big job, right? Where, the next big thing. Oh, I'm going to go into health SaaS. I'm going to go into prop tech. I'm going into that's big. And once I got into the consulting or interim CFO business, all of that drama kind of faded away because, I don't have to get involved in that.
I understand. But what do you think makes a good culture and a good leadership? How do you define those? How can people find those?
Yeah, I have a set of principles that when I go into a client, and I've built this over time, but number one, always assume best intent. So if you go in a company and something's messed up, appears messed up to you, it might not be messed up. It might be messed up, but the person who put that thing in place, right, at that time had a reason for doing so. And so if you go in and so I think that's one, and you want a boss who understands that. Like, if you come in from another company and you have a set of tools and you have a process you do, you want to make sure your boss doesn't come back and say, lose faith in you immediately because you're not doing something the way they themselves do it. I just had a conversation this week about that thing. Number two, psychological safety. And that refers to, if you're familiar with Amy Edmondson, is a Harvard Business School professor who wrote a book about this, and it's so key because if you go into a company and you're afraid to make mistakes, then you're always going to tell everybody what they want to hear. In sales, I'm definitely going to hit this forecast until you can, right? Or at CFOs to the board, oh, we're definitely going to grow 40% this year until we don't. Right. It's a culture where it's so difficult to operate, where every mistake is criticized or brings some kind of emotional response from your boss, or in worst case, you wind up terminated because of it. That's psychological safety, or that's not psychological safety. Psychological safety. And you want to be in a business that's open and transparent, right? And if when you're interviewing with other people and they say, well, I'm doing this, but I don't talk about it a lot because people don't value this. Or, this is how I do the GL, but I don't like to talk about it because people get mad if there's a misstatement. And and I see this a lot too. I have this invoice and I charge it this GL, and boy, like, everyone gets mad when I do it that way, but I don't know how else to do it. Right. So you should look for, for these, look for these things. And then also, especially now in the area of remote work, you want to see if people are staying present, right? On Zoom calls, are people, typing away and you can hear them in the background? Are they watching something? Are they on screen, right? I mean, it's the basic stuff. So staying present in the job. And then I think in a remote environment, it's especially difficult. Like, I'm a proponent of remote work, but it's especially difficult. And the final thing is work-life balance. And I know everyone talks about this, and in Silicon Valley, we've tried to address it with unlimited PTO. You can take as much PTO as you want, and people take less PTO, paid time off, less vacation, right? And so when you go in, you should ask people, like, hey, when's the last time you took holiday? And if people say, oh, no, I never take it. Things are so busy here. It's chaos. Maybe someday. And, maybe someday you don't want to work there. Right. And as a leader, I force my people to take time off, and I force them to go away without their computer. And there are other reasons for that too, but that's like a final thing I would say. And I know everyone says work-life balance, it's really popular and trendy thing, but it's not being done right now. And so make sure you're going to a company that believes in it.
That was super valuable. I really appreciate it, especially for a youngster like me. It's amazing. I'm really grateful to you. I
Of
was looking
course.
to get an answer to one last question. Let's say, what's your favorite SaaS product that you use?
Well, I like to think of it less as the individual. I work mainly in enterprise SaaS, so I think of it less as an individual SaaS product because I personally don't like the point solution SaaS products.
Okay.
So maybe a product that calculates commissions, right? A product that that creates sales incentive plans using AI. Like there's not a lot of value in those. I mean, value in those individual apps, but when built into a tech stack. So if I'm using SaaS optics for AI measurement of my pipeline and my customer cohorts, and then Salesforce or HubSpot or Zoho or that. If I'm using Gainsight for my customer success, if I'm using Exactly to calculate my commissions, and Ironclad to manage my my contracts,
Yeah.
and then accounting, NetSuite, Oracle, SAP. But the point is, and then it's the tech stack, and then it's to the degree to which it's integrated, both in terms of like technical integration, but also in my CRM. Does the RevOps does RevOps put in the right number for ARR, right? Because someone has to manually entry all this stuff, and so to me it's the tech stack, and then it's the degree of integration, both manually and manual entry and technical integration.
Thank you for sharing. Those are my main questions. If you have anything else to share, this would be the moment.
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing and having me on the show. I think our interests are really aligned. Well, we both share a passion for SaaS, and that's obvious. And I also think that we both are trying to present a common language. We're trying to build a common language for the industry. And I think everyone listening to this know that there are a lot of people out there trying to turn an apprenticeship type job in a SaaS into an academic study where people can advance their careers, as has been done with every profession since the beginning of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really grateful. Thank you for your advice. You did great. And yeah,
Thank you.
I'm super grateful. Thank you.
Fantastic.